exposing the secret sauce in business to business marketing. The Tagline Podcast is where real stories meet proven strategies. Let's elevate your business. Real strategies, real stories, real results. In the business to business industry, you're not selling to businesses, it's human to human. We break down what works, what doesn't, and how you can truly stand out. Transparency, credibility, growth. Get a behind the scenes look at what drives success in business to business marketing. Get ready for the next Tagline Podcast powered by the Aebli Group.
Welcome back to the Tagline Podcast powered by the Aebli Group. My name is Justin Starbird. On today's episode, I'm excited to welcome a conversation about leadership, strategy, and operational excellence with Mark Reich. Mark brings a career's worth of insights, having spent over 2 decades with Toyota, mastering the Toyota production system and later driving organizational transformation at the Lean Enterprise Institute. He's also the author of Managing on Purpose, a workbook that helps the reader study Hoshin Kanri to drive strategy efficiency and create impactful work. Throughout his career, Mark has specialized in helping leaders turn complex strategies into actionable plans. His recent work focuses on bridging the often wide gap between high-level business goals and the realities of day-to-day operations, often something that leaders across industry struggle with every day. So, looking for practical ways to align your team, strengthen execution, and sustain improvements, today's episode is going to be packed with actionable advice, and I'm really excited to welcome you in, Mark. Thanks for joining me today.
It's great to be here, Justin, and thanks for that nice introduction.
Well, hey, you created it, so it's really easy to write with a resume like yours. So, happy to have you on the show. Talk a little bit about, what you're up to today.
What I'm up to like now, what I'm currently.
Yeah, I mean, you right now
Well,
you're at the Lean Enterprise Institute. You just wrote a book. You are
yeah,
on a podcast tour. Talk a little bit about what led to writing your book.
sure, thanks. Well, I spent a couple decades in Toyota, and maybe just start there a little bit. I won't spend too much time, but I went to Japan in the 80s. The economy in the US was terrible, and Japan was booming, so I studied Japanese in a graduate school there and ended up landing in Toyota. I think sometimes life is a combination of you make opportunities and they kind of land in your lap sometimes. So this was a combination of the two. I ended up working in Japan for 6 years.
Yep.
Got transferred back to the U.S. and worked for a group in the U.S. called the Toyota Supplier Support Center that helped companies implement TPS. And then I was transferred as an executive in the organization to corporate strategy. And I got a chance to work for 6 years in the corporate strategy group, managing a process called Hoshin Kanri. And we can go into depth about what that is, but I think we will in this podcast. But eventually, after 23 years, I left it. I came to the Lean Enterprise Institute in 2011. So I've been here 14 years. Over the course of after I left Toyota, a lot of organizations kind of started to reach out to me and ask, well, you led strategy in Toyota. What is Hoshin Kanri? How can you help us?
Yeah.
So I visited a fair amount of companies and found that there's actually a pretty large gap between what people say their strategy is and the actual execution of in the company. And that was pretty common across most organizations I met, and we can talk in more depth about it. But I felt that the book I'd probably to be helpful for organizations in that process, because I think it's a process that has a fair amount of complexity and depth based on what I learned in Toyota. I should write a book about it. And I wanted that book to be fairly like useful for people who were like wanting to accomplish something with it. So I wrote a workbook.
Yep.
At LEI, we actually are a small publisher. We published a fair amount of workbooks, but I wrote this for that purpose.
What kind of organizations did you get to visit? How do they, know about you?
Well, first of all, the Lean Enterprise Institute is pretty well known in the world of lean. We were established by a gentleman who's the name of Jim Womack, who wrote a book in the it was published in '89 called "The Machine That Changed the World." That was really the first book that kind of delineated the contents of the Toyota production system to the world. Up until that time, people hadn't really known about it, and Jim coined the term with his research team, Lean. He came out of MIT, and then he set up our institute to we're a nonprofit 501(c) that kind of proliferate and help organizations to educate and support the implementation of lean thinking and practice, because that's what we think is helpful for we think that's helpful for pretty much any organization.
Yeah.
I got I so I can't, that was one we get a fair amount of requests just generically
Yeah.
because people saw that I was part of the staff and I had this experience in Toyota. Organizations started to reach out to me, and really, I would say a plethora of industries. Over the course of the last decade, I've worked with healthcare, construction, of course, manufacturing companies, and companies large and small, the hospitality industry, and learn that actually I'm working with a software company now, but learn that pretty much this thinking is mostly doesn't exist well in organizations, and is applicable anywhere.
So what you're saying is, on the leadership side, there's this vision of where the company is going or what the goals and identity of the company is or should be, and that is not necessarily translated through the rest of the company. So not everybody's pulling in the same direction.
Yeah, I think a common, the most common thing I see is organizations, the top leaders of an organization, CEO and a team maybe, have pulled together something that represents their strategy. And a lot of times that's very useful. I mean, depending on how they've compiled that, there's good like market analysis of where they are in the market. Some intention has been determined on what direction they feel they need to take. And I would say some organizations actually, and many organizations actually put that to print. I mean, it's often in a PowerPoint deck
Yeah.
or maybe the best or it's kind of posted on a wall so people are somewhat aware of there's this vision in the organization. But how most of what I saw is there's this pretty large gap between like that and like what's and the reality of what's happening. Yeah, or it's pretty much not even like referred to for the most extent
Okay.
to many organizations I've seen.
Yeah.
So reconciling that, and there's a lot of reasons for that, but reconciling that gap of like having a vision but not being able to like execute on it,
Sure.
or methodology to like engage the organization on it, I think is pretty it was not what I learned in Toyota, and a lot different what I see outside Toyota.
Did it matter the size of the company? So the larger the company, the less the operations knew about the goal and the strategy, and smaller the company, and the closer leadership was to the day-to-day operations, the better it was, or did that not matter?
I don't think that really mattered. It depends. Now I will say that is a big factor. I saw the same things at small and large companies going in, but that is a factor in the pace of, in I would say the pace of and capability to change, but also the like some of the barriers that organizations overcome. A small organization with a strong leader can do things fairly quickly if they have a good team with them.
Yeah.
And a large organization can encounter a lot of other issues. And I think obviously where I learned this was in a larger organization in Toyota. And the value of it was really kind of breaking down the silos between organization within an organization and getting alignment vertically and horizontally to the direction the organization's going.
going back to your career a little bit at Toyota, I mean, that was really where you got your start out of school, and then that was all you knew as well. So going to lean and then interacting with these other companies that didn't have that sort of, true north, as you called it in your book, didn't have a mechanism for, breaking those barriers. I gotta believe they didn't know what they didn't know too, right? What was it like for you to deal with that?
Well, I'd say, one of the most important parts of this work that I learned in the work I did with Toyota when I was working with companies on the shop floor, in the work that I've done with leadership teams, in implementing Hoshin Kanri, is that every organization requires a situational approach, meaning that the true north you talked about is can fairly easily be defined, I think, for many organizations, depending on where, what industry they're in, et cetera.
Mhm.
But like understanding clearly the current capability and and I would say maybe market dynamic and all those gaps that exist is important part of defining what to do.
Yeah.
So this is not, and I hopefully this comes across in my book. This is not I would say a roadmap. I mean, you have to go into an organization, understand the current state of the organization, meaning I mean, give you an example. I'm working with for example, a healthcare organization now, where they really fully believe and are engaged in lean thinking and practice for their hospital and hospital group.
Yep.
And they've actually practiced a fair amount of things. Like they have a fairly good, I would call daily management system on how things happen during each day and how do they review that. But they've got some like wires crossed when it comes to that relationship to strategy.
Mhm.
And so it's really important. I mean, important step in all this, and the book I think can be helpful if you think about actually the story in the book kind of relates that to some extent because it's not an organization. It's a medium-sized organization. They have a lot of challenges that exist in the company. They were strong for a long time. The company is True Motors, a lawnmower company. That
Mhm.
is the case study in the organization and but they have capability issues, and so understanding that clearly, assessing that, so to speak, and then defining a plan with leadership based on like the goals for the company wants to achieve, but also like this methodology, I think is kind of the way it starts.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that methodology. Hoshin Kanri, um, it's not well known in the United States, despite its wild success in Japanese companies. Clearly, you're working to change that. But talk a little bit about the principles and what it is.
Sure. So I would say about what you just said. And I've been teaching a class for about 10 years. It's pretty well attended. It is, I would say, somewhat known, probably known within our community of lean. The
Yeah.
organizations that have some large organizations have implemented, like Danaher, pretty successfully. But I would say probably to your point, generally at large for America at large, it's not so well known. So maybe just to your point about it's being better known, let me just explain a little bit its history and what it is.
Sure.
Historically, it really got started and this is introduced in my book. It really got started in the early 60s, which came out coming out of the 50s. Some key leaders, thought leaders from the U.S. went to Japan and tried to help Japan coming out of World War II get back on its feet. One of those people, very well known, was Edward Deming, and he introduced really important quality initiatives to Japan, and uh, companies like Toyota and others took those very seriously because the back in the early 60s, the quality was Japan was not known for good quality,
Yeah.
particularly manufactured products. So that they took that very seriously, but they also, Toyota and a few other companies said, we should apply quality and this should be applied across the organization, not merely in our manufacturing processes, but our administrative processes, other places too. And so they introduced this methodology, Hoshin Kanri, to build based on plan, do, check, act, build capability in the organization to kind of deliver good quality management practices. And so Bridgestone, Toyota, a few other companies were started this like in the mid 60s. And it kind of matured over the course of time in Toyota. It's now their methodology for how they set strategy and implement it year to year. But maybe just to define those, and maybe one other point, to define those words, uh, um, Hoshin Kanri. I mean, Hoshin is kind of general, like fundamental direction or policy. Kanri is how it means management.
Mhm.
So it's how you manage your fundamental like direction of the company's going. And I have a definition in my book that I think I'll read for the audience.
Yeah, go for it.
That's just maybe explains. It's a little bit of a long sentence, but Hoshin Kanri is a management system for strategy that defines midterm and long-term direction, those objectives and targets, and annually builds alignment vertically and horizontally to the direction, manages annual execution to the direction, and develops the capability of people throughout the organization. Now, I know that's a mouthful, but that's pretty much what the book explains and what I experienced in Toyota. It was a methodology not only to develop a vision or a plan for the organization, but also to execute on that with rigor and to develop capability, particularly of leaders in the organization.
And hold people accountable, right? I mean, that's another piece is that from what I gathered reading the parts of the book that I was able to is also accountability in each of those elements. And
Well, oh, go ahead.
no, go for it.
No. It's an interesting word in the vernacular. I hear it a lot, accountability. And I think that's sometimes can be a little bit misused term, meaning that the what the and I say misuse the connotation of it. It can be that there is a person and they're not doing their job, and we gotta like hold them accountable because and obviously leaders get paid a lot of money in the organization. They should be able to deliver results. In the book, what I try to convey is that this system builds responsibility in people. And as you know, that which I think is different than accountability. Accountability, what I see it, and you asked, we talked earlier a little bit about what I saw in organizations. What I often saw is companies and executives are expected to deliver on some financial number, and then that financial number is kind of broken down in the organization, and leaders are held accountable to it. And what I would propose is that let's define the organization's like direction, and then what are the specific objectives to accomplish that direction in the organization. And I think that should be a small number, like 3 to 5, that leaders determine that if in the book that there's like five objectives that True Mowers has defined for themselves.
Mhm.
And then let's define responsibility at both at the leadership level, but that responsibility and that work has to be broken down in the organization because just just writing a high level, like putting a number, which is often common, or just a high level goal doesn't like clarify how the work has to actually change. We need to break that down in the organization, and that actually builds like responsibility at all levels in the organization.
Yeah.
And I think people then have a different perspective back to your question about a different perspective on accountability then. I think that it's associated with I own something that's part of this like overall like direction of the company. And I'm talking about people at any level. And it's my responsibility, and I should be held accountable to like accomplish that achievement because that's what makes the organization better.
Well, it also creates the transparency that, and I guess you're right. Responsibility is a better word. I think what I was thinking of is every when you break it down to the degree that you do in the book and that you give in it as the example. Now everybody has that
Hmm.
feeling of accomplishment when things are successful as well, and that success breeds more success, and it's a lot easier to um, you know implement something that's difficult. I mean, this is not, at the end of the day, we're talking about this at a high level, but really it's not easy to do and get buy-in, especially in the larger companies that are used to those silos or, the business units that are operating independently internally and not used to everybody building things off of each other, even though fundamentally that's where everybody usually starts, right? When you're a small startup, everything's sort of, it's really easy to say, all right, Dave, you're responsible for this. And then when you're done, Susan, you take the ball from that and you keep going. And then that goes all the way to the top. And so when you have, medium to large organizations, as you explained, it's really hard to break those barriers down.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. And I would say that, but even in smaller organizations, and I've interacted with a fair number, there can be silos in the organization
Yeah.
like that. And I would say that often, like a startup or it's driven by some like visionary leader, which is a really good thing. I mean, this is like part of what I think makes our country great is there's people take initiative and recognize a customer need
Yeah.
and then build a product or that kind of addresses that need. And I think that's strong in the like in our country, but in the world right now. And so we definitely don't want to. We want people like that. The challenge becomes in when you get beyond that inventor or that got the person who had that initiative. Uh, all of a sudden and that let's just say that has success. All of a sudden that individual has to manage an organization now, and that might not be what made them successful, but in many cases, they're they people look to that person because of their vision and the role they've had. So what I guess an important part of this of Hoshin Kanri, what I introduce is when you're beyond that first 6 months or something, or even at the beginning, I think it's good to plan. You need a mechanism to your point earlier of that builds alignment both vertically and horizontally in the organization. The horizontal part, if you look at any kind of research or anything, is actually the most difficult. I
Yeah.
mean, the vertical part I think is difficult to do well, but it's generally organizations do it. They break things get assigned based on the silo. The horizontal part to yours you need a practical mechanism for leaders, and I think it starts at the top. Leaders across the organization need to get aligned on what they're doing as a corporation, as a company, as an organization. And getting that alignment sometimes can be challenging and get, so I think you need a mechanism to be able to like build that alignment. Also, though, you probably need at some point the organization is going to have to recognize that like that type of leader behavior of working as a team, aligning, is something that has to be recognized too. It's often a difficult thing to measure. Well, if you're just a leader who has to achieve a financial target or a cost reduction target or a quality target, well, that's easy to assign to somebody. How do you measure that you and I work well together? And I think organizations sometimes struggle with that, but
Yeah.
Toyota, we recognize that. And I can't say there was a perfect measure of that, but it's something that was evaluated as part of a leader's kind of performance.
Yeah. Well, so you mentioned, leadership as being, the paramount to the success. You have to have somebody in part of the book, you talk about introspection and, looking internally and being, analytical about, what is actually happening in your organization. So, to a degree, leaders have to accept some criticism, or they have to accept that there's going to be some change, that what they're doing today, while there might be some success, isn't the betterment of the whole. And so how do you help leaders overcome that, or see that, or kind of not let themselves be their own worst enemy?
Wow, that's a great question. I think to some extent a leader, and I meet a lot of them. I was just actually on a call yesterday with one who I believe is a great leader, and a CEO of a company. And but I think great leaders are introspective, generally speaking. And even some of the like more famous ones we know. I don't think that's so often visible to people, but I think if they can, let's face it, often in people in those situations, I mean, I think it's not universal. There are certain people that have been successful all their lives, but people often get into those positions through trials and tribulations over the course of their lives. They've had successes and failures. And so generally speaking, I think, they've gotten many people in those positions have gotten in those positions because of that kind of trajectory of learning. And so I think providing the organization and leaders like that a way to maybe more with a more defined structure to self-reflect on their behaviors, their um, kind of their basic thinking,
Yep.
I think is usually like fairly appreciated.
Yeah.
So now I don't work with every organization, so I don't know, but the ones I have interacted with have found that that's really helped. Now, I think I would say also that's not the other thing is to take it off. CEOs, leaders, they're people too. And so this whole construct of like this book and the what I learned in Toyota, it's not about the person. It's about the organization and about the process. So I think taking it away from like it's about one person
Hmm.
and more and building a structure in the organization that allows the organization to reflect on its how not only its personal behaviors, but how the organization functions. How do people interact with each other? How do processes occur in and analyzing whether they're effective or not effective, I think. And so in the book, I introduced, part of this PDC, Plan, Do, Check, Act, is a reflection component. The book starts with reflecting on what has been done
Hmm.
and what's not working. And that can be some of that can be related to the leader's role, but a lot of that is can be related to just how the organization has traditionally functioned, and having some reflection of that and thinking about how to change, I think is often welcomed by a lot of or leadership teams.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's talk a little bit more about the book. It is a workbook. I have it right here. Talk about how to, how people are supposed to use it and get through it, and, then apply it to the business. I mean, I was looking, there's one of the lessons, I don't know if we call them lessons per se, but, there's a uh, charts to fill in, and
Yeah.
it's very, very interactive. So talk a little bit about, of course, the purpose of the book is to help organizations, institute the Hoshin Kanri, and then, use the lean methodology to drive success and efficiency and impactful work. But, talk a little bit about how to use the book.
Sure. Well, the book, just to speak a little bit about the book content, it's a workbook, and which is a major component of the book. So, but another major component of the book is it's built off of a case study of of a company that's a fictitious company, but it's an amalgamation of organizations that I've collaborated with,
Mhm.
and they're a lawnmower company, and the industry is going through a major shift in terms of shifting from like gas mowers to electric mowers, and they're like a little bit behind in all that in that market. They're traditionally been a very strong company, and it introduces a set of a leadership team in the organization that's trying to wrestle with how to do that. And so over the course of the book is structured after the intro and some forward and stuff by people. It's really structured around like what I mentioned earlier, this plan, do, check, act. So how does the organization go in and plan, do, and check and act over the course of and it lasts it's about a year and a half. The book, in the final part of the book, we kind of jump ahead about 5 years ahead to see what's happened. But it basically over the course of year and a half, they implement Hoshin Kanri. And as they do that, the book talks about how you build uh, um, how you get consensus on what the plan should be, what should the objectives be in the organization that you're working towards, like, and based on your vision and other inputs in the organization, that process is explained. Then once that's been developed, it gets broken down to the next like levels within the organization. And I introduce tools to like such as an A3. An A3 is a problem solving tool that we use in Toyota to define art could be used. We can use it as like you can develop a strategy A3, which the leaders in the organization do, or you can also develop a problem solving A3 to tackle some of the issues that exist uh, and address that higher level problem. So that's all. Those are all introduced, and then the book goes through some specific methodologies, templates you can use to as you execute.
Mhm.
So, and that's the important, back to our discussion, the important execution is an important part. Okay, you can put together a plan, but can you actually go through with it? And so that a good portion of the book talks about how do you set up a structure on I propose a monthly basis to see how you're doing relative to the goals you put forth and the plan you put together based on those goals. And that can be applied up and down the organization. And then how you go about reflecting on that. There's some tools to introduce for reflection, and then how do you take stuff at the end of the year and define, well, okay, this is something we achieved, and
Right.
we can move it over to daily management. It's something that top leaders don't have to think about it as much anymore. So all that is kind of through the course of the book, and there are specific methodology and tools introduced in each area. And just a note of like a practical note about that. If you purchase the book, it's all those there. You can get all those on our website, lean.org, have
Yep.
access to those things.
That's great. So talk a little bit about the length of time. You're sort of expecting folks to get through the book, and you mentioned the case study is over the course of a year and a half. What are your thoughts on how long somebody should be, take to get through the book, and then how long what's their next step after that?
Well, I think that, the book can be a reference book, but it's also good to read the story. And so like just like reading it up front, like you've just been doing, I think it's helpful to give people like a context of what overall it is. But then as you work to your point, to your question, as you work through this with your own organization, it can become a reference as you go through that cycle of plan, do, check, act. And this is if we think about one of the things that's an important part of this book that's came out of my Toyota learning is everything's a process. One of the things I talk about in the book is, everybody gets up every morning and brushes their teeth. Nobody ever thinks about that as like, oh, there's a process. But in fact, it's probably a pretty standard process that everybody follows when they
Yeah.
brush their teeth. But that's something you can kind of think about. Am I doing it effectively or not? And you can like fix that problem within the course of a couple. maybe a couple days, like as you try to brush your teeth differently. This is a process also, Hoshin Kanri, what we're talking about. And the PDCA, that cycle of reflection happens over the course of a year. So you're going to need a year to, fully like kind of understand the effectiveness of it. That doesn't mean you need a year to like fix things. In the book, things get adjusted throughout the course of the first year. In the first couple of months, the CEO recognizes some things aren't going as smoothly, and if as long as you're like effectively tracking that, the system is built to address those things quickly because you have small PDCA each month to see how you're doing. Uh, but the fact of the matter is, and you'll get results quickly. Many organizations I work with get their result because people are focusing on specific things, they get results pretty quickly. But the building a mature process, and I talk about this at the end of the book, it probably requires you go through the cycle over a little bit diligently over the course of 2 or 3 years to get it matured and build a good standard that allows you then to like continually improve on that.
It's awesome. Well, Mark, I really appreciate you coming on today and
Sure.
sharing your insight and certainly talking about your book, Managing on Purpose. I think it's certainly useful, at least our organization, and it's applicable to businesses of all sizes and industries.
I think so. And I appreciate you having me on, Justin. It's been great being here.
So on the screen there's a QR code. How else can people find you?
Yeah, if you go to, I would suggest, if you're trying to improve your organization, most companies are, go to lean.org, lean.org. That's our website, and you can find my book there. You can find me there. I'm within the I'm a member of the staff. But you also just kind of if you kind of search around in there, you can find any that we're organization has existed for 26 years. We're a nonprofit. Part of our community purpose is building knowledge around this topic. So whatever your interest might be, Hoshin Kanri, uh, uh, you know, continuous improvement, standardized work, the type of things that we have introduced over these last few decades to our community, that a lot of it built off of what Toyota does. You can find that. So go to the website and that's all free. I should mention, my book's not free, but the content you can find on that website is free. So there's a lot of good learning there.
Great. Well, Mark, I certainly appreciate you sharing all of your experience and insights about the topic, and certainly, the book is so useful. So thank you so much for this.
Yes, thanks for having me on.
All right. On behalf of my guest today, Mark Reich from the Lean Enterprise Institute, you've been listening to the Tagline Podcast. Until next time.